Right, it's 10:01 a.m. over in Singapore. Good morning, colleagues from the Institute of Technical Education, the Polytechnics University, and those of you from SkillsFuture Singapore. Welcome to the second Jobs and Skills Insight webinar covering changing job mix in the Singapore labour market. This webinar is organized by SSG in partnership with Indeed, the #1 job site in the world that helps more than 250 million people in over 60 countries find jobs, promote themselves to potential employers, and learn more about companies that they are interested in. Well, as I can see, it's a beautiful morning here from SSG office overlooking the Bay Area and made more spectacular with the presence of a guest speaker from Indeed today. First of all, we have Mr. Mark Reilly, who is the Director of Employer Insights at Indeed. Mark leads the global evangelist programs to shape the recruitment industry through the provision of personalized insights, research, and best practices with Indeed clients worldwide. Mark, are you there?
Yes.
All right. And right next to us, actually, literally a few thousand kilometers away, I guess, is Mr. Callam Pickering, who is an economist with Indeed Hiring Lab, focusing on the Australia and Asia Pacific region. And prior to joining Indeed, Callam had served with the Reserve Bank of Australia, as well as with online publications, the Business Spectator and Eureka Report. Callam, are you here with us?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. Now, before we go further, allow me to share a few pointers and advice for our audience so that we will ensure that everyone listening in will get the most out of this session. It will last 45 minutes, of which Mark and Callam will take about 20 minutes to cover the topic before we launch into the question and answer segment. This webinar will be recorded and published through SSG My Skills Future, as well as SSG's LinkedIn Insights portal and other platforms, along with the slides, which we will also be sending to you via email. So if you are planning to snap screen images of the slides, just rest easy because the slides will go to you. Throughout the session, your microphone will be muted to avoid electronic feedback and interference. And we encourage you to post your question pertaining to the topic by using the chat function, which you can find on the page itself. There's an icon that is indicated as chat. You may also vote for questions which you are interested into. As much as possible, we will try our best to address as many questions specific to the topic within the limited time available. With this, let's get started. Now, today's webinar topic is on the changing job mix in Singapore labour market, and we are drawing from Indeed's available statistics dating from 2015 to 2018. Now, with Singapore's labour market constantly changing in terms of the skills and occupations or jobs in demand, a mismatch exists literally at any time, arising from a difference between employment opportunities available and skill sets held by job seekers. So how has job mix in Singapore changed between 2015 and 2018? What is the level of mismatch and how is it measured? What does this mean to our employers and individuals? What can our Institute for Higher Learning, or IHL in short, learn from this? And what can they do to contribute towards reducing the mismatch and to help, most importantly, their students in their end goal of landing the job of their choice? So let's welcome Mark from Indeed, as well as Callam, who will enlighten us on these questions and more.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar today. And I want to thank SSG also for partnering with Indeed on today's webinar. So as you heard during the introduction there, my name is Mark Reilly, and I am the Director of Employer Insights. So at its most simplest form, my job is to work with Indeed's data and our partners and recruiters that we engage with to look at the data that we are capturing globally and share that out within each of our regions, and talk with people about how we can use this to better recruitment and better individual strategies that organizations are trying to put together. So I'll be running through the session today. I just want to give Callam a very quick moment to introduce himself as well. Callam has put together the bulk of the research that we're going to run through today. Callam?
Thanks, Mark. So I'm the Asia Pacific Economist at Indeed, focusing on labour market research across the region, and you will hear much more of me once we get to the QA section. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Callam. So to help set the scene, we heard some of the statistics there, but I want to just give you a very brief overview of Indeed so that you can have an understanding of where the data for today's session has come from. Now, Indeed was founded in 2004 with the idea of simplifying the process of helping job seekers find jobs. And to do that, we are what we would typically call a job aggregator rather than just a job site. The difference is that we go out and find the jobs on the internet and we index them, very similar to the way a search engine works, rather than relying on people coming to our platform to post those jobs. As a result, when we're looking at data sets like this, we do have a fairly comprehensive source of jobs available to us. Now, over that time, that has led to us becoming the #1 job site in the world, with over 250 million unique visitors or job seekers coming to our site every single month, which also gives us a very good view of the other side of the equation. So we both have the jobs and the job seekers, not just here in Singapore, but globally, and we'll talk about how Singapore compares to some of those other markets with that data. And in addition to the actual job seekers coming and searching for jobs, we have the 150 million resumes worldwide, which is a key piece of the data that we'll talk through in today's session. Closer to home here in Singapore, we've been operating for the past 9 years, gathering jobs and building up and working with job seekers to help them find jobs. We're now running at about 1.6 million visits a month onto indeed.com.sg here in Singapore. And we're tracking and adding around 30,000 new jobs into our data set every single month here in Singapore. So let's start off with talking about Indeed's mismatch methodology. As was mentioned, Indeed has access to millions of online job postings and resumes here in Singapore and around the world. We use this data to explore a wide variety of labour market issues. Recently, we turned our attention to the skills gap and developed what we refer to as our mismatch methodology. This analysis started in the United States. We've run it in other countries such as the UK, Canada, and Australia. And most recently, we've turned our attention to Singapore. Our mismatch analysis allows us to assess two key trends across the Singapore labour market. First, how Singapore's job mix has evolved, essentially which occupations are thriving, and alternatively, which occupations are struggling. Second, the mismatch between job opportunities and job seekers across Singapore. This is where the skills and experience of job seekers don't align with the opportunities that are available to them. These are important economic issues and ones that institutes of higher learning can play a key role with. So what is Indeed's mismatch methodology? It's a comparison tool used to assess differences between job seekers and job postings. The mathematics may be familiar to some of you. It's not a particularly complex equation, but at its core, what we're doing is comparing distribution of job seekers, or S in the formula on the screen, to the distribution of vacancies, or V. And we're tracking how that changes over time. This is an example of a dissimilarity index, and it's a common methodology used to explore issues such as skill mismatches and social mobility. If it seems a little confusing at the moment, don't worry, we have a simple example coming up in just a few slides. So I talked about the volume of data that Indeed has. So what specific data are we looking at for our mismatch equation? Well, all of the data is coming from our own platform, our vacancies are our job postings on Indeed. So as I mentioned in the intro, we aggregate these. So rather than relying on people posting ads, we have what we consider a fairly comprehensive and reliable summary of the jobs available. The job titles that they get posted with can sometimes be a little messy though. So within the Indeed platform, we normalize all of the job titles. Now this groups similar job titles together. Overall for Singapore, our groupings allow for a little over 6,000 unique job titles that we're currently tracking in our database. The second part, job seekers, refers to users on our website who have uploaded their resume within that month on Indeed. Now this data set is then analysed on a monthly basis. Analysing how the mismatch changes over time can provide key insights to labour market trends and dynamics. So as promised, to demonstrate, here is a simplified example of the mismatch equation in action. We have two job sectors, tech and non-tech. There are a total of 5 job seekers and 5 vacancies, which at face value may seem ideal. Yet we have an imbalance, a mismatch, if you will, between the job seekers and the job vacancies. Tech has 2 roles, but nobody looking for jobs. Non-tech has 3 roles, which need to be fought over by 5 job seekers. This leads to our mismatch of 40%, or in other words, 40% or 2 of the 5 job seekers would need to be trained up and transfer their skills into tech roles for the mismatch to disappear. So with the data definitions and example out of the way, our presentation can now explore our 2 key findings. We will first discuss Singapore's job mix and how that has changed since the beginning of 2015, which is when we started this analysis. Now, job mix, of course, refers to the distribution of job postings, VI over V, and how that has changed over time. We'll then move on to the shift, we'll then shift to the mismatch rather, incorporating job seeker data into our analysis and expanding that simple 2-sector example that we just shared. And we'll look at the 6,000 plus different occupations that we are tracking here in Singapore. Now, Singapore's job market changes every month. We see some industries thrive, creating new and different opportunities, while other industries and roles struggle. The tech sector is a prime example of an industry that has grown strongly over the past few years. New occupations have emerged and matured, such as software engineer, full stack developer, and data scientist. Other jobs have not performed so well though. A common example among advanced economies is the ongoing decline in manufacturing and agriculture. Roles that can be easily outsourced is another example. To understand a country's job mix is to really understand its economy. And certainly changes to that job mix could be relevant to government policy or even where institutes of higher learning choose to focus their funds. Does Singapore produce enough tech workers to meet demand from employers? Should there be more tech courses from institutes of higher learning? Is Singapore producing too many accountants? These are some of the questions we can answer and we can examine and answer as we look through our data. Now, our first graph shows the evolution of Singapore's labour market. The distribution of jobs today is 21% different from what it was in January 2015. An increase in this measure means that the job distribution has changed from its initial distribution in January 2015. Perhaps there is a greater demand for data scientists or digital marketers. Maybe there's less demand for accountants and admin officers. The upward trend over the past 4 years means that our job mix has increasingly moved away from its baseline. Now, as I said, we've run this in multiple countries around the world now. So to put these figures into some context, here's a cross-country analysis. Singapore's evolution is quite common. Every country we have assessed has experienced a similar change in their job mix. Now, for some countries, it was a little faster than others, but they've all arrived at a similar place over the same time period. It's worth remembering, though, that jobs driving the changing job mix will be different for each of these countries. The rate of change might be similar, but the drivers of that change can be very different. Now, this table shows the job titles that have experienced the biggest jump in their job share in December 2016, in December 2017, and finally in December 2018. Tech roles have become increasingly prominent. Software engineer has ranked #1 in each of the 3 years, and over time, it's been joined by a range of other tech-related roles. Full stack developer, data scientist, software architect, just to name a few. And in December 2018, 9 of those top 10 fastest growing jobs were tech roles. Even our 10th role there, digital marketer, it tends to be a very tech-heavy marketing role. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we have jobs that have seen their job share decline the most. These are those that are less prominent now than they were in December 2015. And the list is remarkably consistent from year to year. The top 3, customer service representative, administrative assistant, and accounts assistant, have held the same ranking in each of these years. It's interesting to note that the jobs with a declining share do tend to be jobs with lower educational requirements. There are exceptions, of course, accountant and research fellow, for example, but for the most part, this does hold true. And the changes over time led to a big change in Singapore's job market. Software engineer was the 10th largest occupation here in Singapore in December 2015. Today, it's jumped to #5. Software architect was at #40. It's jumped to #12. And the surging demand for tech workers all but ensures that other tech roles will soon be joining them among Singapore's largest occupations. Now, you may have noticed that even though occupations such as admin assistant and customer service rep are on the decline, that hasn't been enough to dislodge them from Singapore's biggest jobs. That may take a few more years due to the number of people in these occupations. While the job mix is certainly interesting, it is just one part of the equation. By incorporating data on job seekers via the thousands of resumes we have on Indeed, we can assess how well job opportunities and job seekers align. Because as any employee will tell you, just because a role is available doesn't necessarily mean it can be filled. Now, we'll take that 2-sector example that I shared from earlier and expand it into the 6,000 plus different occupations here in Singapore. Now, in expanding this, we find that mismatch between job seekers and job opportunities has gradually declined since the beginning of 2015. We've dropped from 44% to 36%. That basically means that around 36% of the time, job seekers and job opportunities are poorly aligned. It will either be difficult to find suitable candidates, or there will simply be too many candidates for the roles available. What this means is that this 36% of job seekers would need to be trained up with the skills necessary for new roles, or transfer their existing knowledge and skills into new occupations for the distribution of job seekers to be the same as the distribution of job opportunities. That's not easily done because job seekers take time to complete this training and transfer. Now, once again, it's useful to compare Singapore against some of the other markets. Mismatch in Singapore is middle of the road among countries we have assessed, certainly much lower than Australia, and a little higher than in countries such as the United States and Canada. Yet despite a higher mismatch, Singapore has the lowest unemployment rate going on amongst these countries. This may be because Singapore has done a better job of adapting to mismatch, possibly through employers' willingness to compromise on necessary versus nice to have skills, or relaxing on experience requirements and choosing to offer staff training and development. So what jobs are contributing the most to the mismatch? Well, here's a list of jobs with the greatest shortage of candidates. There's been a big change over the past 4 years. In January 2015, Mismatch was created by a lack of candidates for roles such as sales executive, administrative assistant, and account executive. Today, though, it's dominated by tech roles. Many of the fastest growing jobs are also those that are the most difficult to fill. probably because it takes time for job seekers to develop new skills and adapt to these changing demands of employers. At the other end of the spectrum, we have occupations where there are a lot of candidates but not enough jobs. These jobs also contribute greatly to mismatch. There's been less change amongst these occupations. Supervisor, server, driver have all ranked highly both in January 2015 and recently in February 2019. So we typically find a shortage of jobs occupations with lower educational requirements. By comparison, we typically find a shortage of candidates in jobs with higher educational requirements. There are exceptions to the rule, of course, but this is a good, useful rule of thumb. Higher educational requirements, such as bachelor's degrees, master's, diplomas, and the like, act as a barrier to entering certain jobs and fields. These requirements can make it difficult to fill some roles. Jobs with lower educational, skill, or experience requirements are open to anyone who wants to apply. Many are appealing to younger workers without experience, or potentially older workers who are choosing to stay in the workforce. While for higher skilled roles, employers are often forced to compete fiercely for the best available talent. Very different market dynamics. Mismatch helps us identify the jobs that might be easy or hard to fill. These can be used to infer potential skill or experience gaps, and it can be useful for employers, universities, and the Singapore government itself. This is particularly true in the tech sector. Our analysis reveals that the Singapore economy would benefit from policies that increase the number of courses and places for tech at institutes of higher learning. Skilled migration targeting tech is also worthy of consideration. And for employers themselves, internal training and a wider search for talent may be two simple ways of meeting the ever-rising demand for their tech talent. Singapore has managed a changing labour market better than most. Mismatch is relatively high, but the unemployment rate remains very low. Employers are devising ways to deal with imperfect candidates, which is one of the reasons mismatch hasn't contributed to high unemployment here. Addressing mismatch, though, would still lead to superior job outcomes. The right people in the right jobs boost economic activity and can make businesses more productive and innovative. In Singapore's case, addressing shortages in tech skills could make a big difference to the domestic economy. With that, I want to thank you for joining us for sharing the research part of this session, and I'll hand it back over to SSG to open it up for questions to me and Callam.
Thank you, Mark, for your presentation on job mix and mismatch in the Singapore's labour market between 2015 and 2018. I think I would want to encourage the audience out there. There's about, I think, close to 90 of us over on this webinar. I encourage you to post your questions. There's no questions that would be too silly for us to address. And as much as possible within the limited time that we have left, we will try our best to address questions that are specific to the topic. Now, before we identify the questions for Mark and Callam to look at, perhaps I could fire off the first questions that I would perhaps like an answer to. There's this report by a newspaper in Singapore, which is called Today. The report was dated 28 May 2019. And it was actually mentioned in the report that Singapore will face the largest degree of job displacement regionally, not just within the country, but regionally, with 20.6% of our full-time employees projected to be impacted in the next decade. So for the men in the street, not just the IHL, for the men in the street, when they observe that the distribution of jobs today is 21%, different from that of January 2015, what does it mean? Why should they be concerned, since our rate of job mix and mismatch changes are sort of similar to, for example, developed countries such as US, Canada, Australia that are cited in Mark's presentation slide 11 and 12. Mark, would you have Any thoughts on that?
Just going to go back to the slide quickly. So I just want to clarify that I understood that. So the core of this question is really around what does this mean for a job seeker?
That's right. Because by looking at the slides, if we are sort of aligned with some of those developed countries in terms of the movements of the job mix, then does it mean that actually we are sort of in line with them, and there should not be any concern because job mix in a way will change over time, and tapping on the job mismatch information, then we are sort of also in between these developed countries. So does it mean that we need not be overly concerned with this sort of data, but rather than to panic over it, for example?
Yeah, Callam, do you want to address that from the job mix side?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it's important to recognise that right now Singapore is managing mismatch and the changing job mix quite well, and certainly better than most of the other countries that we've analysed. But of course, the impact of the changing job mix over time will largely depend on the jobs that are changing and how well the Singapore workforce can adapt to those changes. So certainly there is some cause for concern. There's certainly a cause to remain vigilant in how we approach this, and certainly for job seekers to continue to upskill, continue to develop their skills in a way that makes them employable in the modern Singapore workforce, particularly as it continues to evolve.
All right. Looking at the questions, let's take the first one where Dr. Scott has posed, does Indeed monitor contract outsourcing jobs? So perhaps Calum, you want to take this?
Certainly my understanding is that yes, we do. Although I'm not 100% certain of what we're referring to with contract outsourcing jobs. Are we talking about jobs from Singapore businesses that are outsourced to other countries? Because if that's the case, then those jobs would be captured in other countries, is my understanding of how that would work.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, like, is this fixed term employee contracts or I think the general answer is Indeed monitors all jobs available. So that does include full-time, permanent, contract, temporary roles. We do monitor all of those types of jobs.
I think that's correct. I think over time, maybe there will be a visual change in the composition of these different jobs, whether they are permanent jobs or contract jobs or temporary jobs and so on and so forth. So perhaps then there will be a pattern that we can see eventually over time as well. There's a question posed by Lucy. Is there also some data to match graduates in IHL versus the 6,000 plus unique job positions available on a regular basis?
Well, certainly the data we have is all on job postings. That's what our analysis reflects. It would be wonderful if we were also able to obtain information on graduate profiles, and so we could map that against the mismatch data we have, and so we could track whether there are enough tech graduates being processed through the system, or whether there's too many accounting graduates, for example. But at the moment, that's not a comparison we've made with our data.
I think there are also two more questions from Shu that sort of are quite related to each other, asking whether the mismatch between the seekers, the job seekers, educational qualifications and job posting educational requirements are taken into consideration. And whether there will be analysis that could advise them on how graduates from a particular program, for example, are faring in the Singapore job market. So whether indeed statistics would be able to give them this sort of insights into this aspect.
Yep. So right now, our mismatch analysis is purely based on job postings, the title of job postings versus job titles in resumes. Education can be inferred from that. There's a clear trend in our data where we do see that there does tend to be shortages in jobs that have high educational requirements. As for the second question, which was in regards to social sciences, I believe. Again, while there might be some small variation from occupation to occupation within this group, because these are highly skilled areas, there is likely to be skill shortages present for most of these degree areas.
I think we continue to see some good questions coming in with regard to customization of the statistics that were presented, not just based on total jobs posting versus total resume posted, for example, but even in terms of the job mismatch based on different industry clusters. So this question, I think, probably will be in IHL colleagues' mind because they are in the business of pushing out programs to train students to meet manpower demands by the employers. So the different schools within the IHL, just to help Mark and Callam understand, they would be looking at whether my program are sufficient, whether my program are well designed to train my students in the relevant skills so that they would be readily employed or in demand by the employers as soon as they graduate. So I guess that's why they have all these questions about whether the statistics would go deeper into informing based on industry clusters or even based on different subsectors within the industry, for example.
Certainly, we've done this mismatch analysis for a range of different industry groups. We've done it for all the countries that we've analysed. We've examined the tech sector itself, the finance sector, as well as healthcare. And we're working on putting together other industry mismatch analyses as well. In Singapore, we do tend to see very similar levels of mismatch for both the finance sector and the tech sector. We do seem to find heightened mismatch in the healthcare sector, and this is an outcome that we've seen across a range of different countries, which I think largely reflects the growing demand for healthcare services across the world due to issues such as an aging population and the difficulty that many countries are facing to address that demand.
There's this question from Wei Ye, which asks, is there any idea, or do we have any idea if the requirement for higher education for job roles are due to inflated demand by employers over time or really due to job scope requirements? For instance, he said, if postings for the same normalized job title require higher education over time.
Yeah.
I mean, we do need to be a little bit speculative on this one. I think it's probably a case of both. Certainly, I know of many occupations where there are higher education requirements now compared with, say, 5 or 10 years ago. So there is some educational inflation that's going on here. And it's quite interesting this is the case, because if this is giving rise to mismatch, then potentially there's the scope for employers to dial it back a little bit. One of the ways to address mismatch is to determine whether does someone really need a master's degree, or is a bachelor degree sufficient for this role? Is there certain skills that you absolutely need to have, or are there some skills that can be developed on the job? So certainly if Singapore employers are asking for much higher educational requirements than they were in the past, then that could be making it more difficult to fill some roles. Whereas if the requirements are a little bit less, it would be much easier.
Yeah, I think just to add that, when we actually go out and talk to employers, particularly when we run workshops around their job content, that's one of the ideas that we challenge a lot around, is what you're asking for the actual requirement for the job?
I think we are now hitting 10:37. This webinar is scheduled to end at 10:45, but if we do exceed a few minutes or so, I hope the audience would stay with us as we complete this session. I think there's a lot of interesting questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take them all at the same time at this moment. I think there's this, while we are presenting all these different statistics, there's a human side to all this for our IHL's colleagues. There's this question there's a slide where we are covering the expanding jobs, and most of them are coming from the tech. Most of them are tech roles. Does it mean that actually the schools, in a way, should be ramping up their tech programs while reviewing the non-tech ones? Is this a sort of like a zero-sum game where there should be more students being trained for tech roles, while those non-tech roles that are shrinking should be deprioritized? Is it that simple a question to answer?
It's a great question. I mean, there's no particularly easy answers for this. What we do see in our data, though, is that there is a clear shortage in tech talent, not just in Singapore, but worldwide. And so a lot of countries have to work out ways to address that skill shortage that's apparent. One of the clear ways is more places at institutes of higher learning. Now, whether that can be achieved without also reducing places for other disciplines, I don't know. That's a question for Singapore. But certainly it does seem as though Singapore and other countries do need to be producing a bit more tech talent compared with what they've been producing so far.
I think there's this continuing concern about, because our IHLs basically comprises institutions that are training students that leads to the award of a degree or lead to the award of a diploma, or for the case of an Institute for Technical Education leading to the award of NITEC or higher NITEC in short form, or even a technical diploma, for example. Then looking at the statistics, seems like a lot of the jobs that are expanding, tech role jobs, for example, or tech job roles, they probably will require the thing that comes straight to the mind is that they will need a degree. So for some of our institutions, which are the polytechnics and IT, the concern would be that, does it mean that my students are going to be unable to find jobs if they do not get a degree? And is going for a degree the next step that everyone should aim for? Is there any way in which the polytechnics, for example, could ensure that their program would enable someone to move into jobs that currently employers would only be on the lookout for degree holders, but actually, if the polytechnics are able to devise the appropriate program to cater to that sort of needs, they will be able to henceforth enable their students to move into those jobs. So the question is that, is it a must to have a degree education or degree qualification versus, for example, a polytechnic? Is there a need to shape employers' thinking that every time you look for someone for a tech role, for example, like a software engineer or developer and so on, or IT security specialist, you must look for a degree holder, or rather you should actually go from on the basis of what skills do I need? If you are a diploma holder, but you have those skills, even though I'm looking for a degree graduate, I would still hire you. So should that be a messaging that our IHL colleagues should continuously push out together with SSG to the employees so that they would adopt this sort of enlightened approach of looking for their manpower?
Yeah, Mark might be in a good place to answer this, because in the tech sector, we do seem to see that not all tech workers are going through traditional pathways, such as universities. Many are doing short courses and things of that nature to upskill and be able to get into the sector and be competitive in the sector. So it doesn't necessarily have to go through the university system per se. There are certainly ways for the polytechnics to develop courses and the likes that could certainly help to alleviate the shortage that we see with tech workers.
Yeah, I think from an employer standpoint, there are a large number of people in the tech space that are not degree qualified, and there's a lot of pathways into technical roles. So it really depends on the type of job that a candidate is interested in. You know, I would imagine certainly some of the space, you know, things like cybersecurity, which require that more in-depth knowledge. They tend to have those higher education requirements. But we have a range of other roles. You know, if I think about something like a business analyst is a perfect example for a role that Callam's referring to there. You know, someone might be working in the healthcare space. They have experience that they have built up as a subject matter expert, and a short course to train them on more of the tech side is something that will allow them to transfer into something like a BA specialist, working either within their organization or a new organization. That way they're bringing all of their knowledge that they've acquired and taking up a new role within the tech space that will then continue to develop their skills. Similar for more entry-level people, there's quite a range of opportunities coming in, and it just might vary the types of opportunities that people have as their entry point, but not necessarily disqualify them from building their career once they have got additional experience under their belt.
I think that's a good point. The past few years, there has been a lot of anxiety on the ground about the disruption that are being posed by technology, that a lot of jobs coming up are actually tech roles, and a lot of people who are not trained in those areas would literally be out of the market. I think the point here is that it's not a zero-sum game for those people who are being trained for non-tech roles. With increasing use of technology, there will be also other jobs being created, while some of the jobs would be displaced or disappeared or redesigned to meet the change in requirements by employers. So for the polytechnics, for the IHLs, it's a case about training their students so that their programs, regardless of which program they are in, are infused with elements of technological skills, for example, or even soft skills that they could bring around when they move from one job to another, whether it is in a tech company or a non-tech company. So I think it is not as apocalyptic as what some of us would choose to think. I think we have time for perhaps one last question. And actually, I would like to take two questions together. One from, if I may mention, is from Salman Kar, as well as from Xiang Chen. Let's go to the question. Sorry, I've lost the picture at this moment. I think the question posed by Salman is that does your mismatch analysis take into consideration soft skills that jobs require, and that the soft skills that are also found in those resumes? Yeah, I think this would be the questions that is posed that are similar. For example, and then Xiang Chen also has a question. Xiang Chen asking, does Indeed also analyze the mismatch down to the skills level?
Yep, so our mismatch analysis is purely based on job postings and resume data. So we acknowledge that there can be slight differences in skills across jobs that have the same job title. And these can be technical skills or they can be soft skills. We view our job mismatch as being a proxy for skills mismatch, because across a lot of jobs, the skills makeup will be very similar. And so if a certain job is hard to fill, it's probably because there is a skill shortage for the skills required for that job. A more specific skills-based mismatch is something that we're working on, but it's very much a work in progress. So hopefully it's something that I might be able to share at some point in the future.
I think that is good news to our IHL audience, because they probably will be looking at that piece of investigative works that you will be doing at your end. And that's leading to the last question that I want to ask Mark and Callam. Is it possible for you to share what's on your plate at the moment over at Indeed, or what Indeed will be doing in the near future that could potentially be relevant or of interest to our IHL colleagues, so that they could keep a lookout and draw on these insights that you may produce over time?
Well, certainly with regards to Singapore, my plan is to develop this mismatch methodology further, delving into some of the specific industries that we've got data for, such as the tech industry, finance, as well as healthcare, and sort of getting a real feel for where the mismatch is across these industry groups.
Okay, I think, yeah, well, our IHL colleagues will be probably looking out. And I think we have come to 10:49 a.m. That's like 4 minutes beyond what we have scheduled. I really appreciate all of our IHL colleagues for staying with us for this long. We have come to the end of our Q&A session, but I know there are a lot more questions that have yet to be answered. Very grateful to Mark and Callam from Indeed for spending the morning with us to share their insights, as well as answering those questions that are posed. I hope that everyone on this channel have some good takeaways from the sessions, as well as I did, if not more. And I think what Mark and Callam has shared is that job mix are changing over time in Singapore labor market, and the job mismatch is, while always existing, is at the level where we could potentially do more to reduce the mismatch, so that our job seekers would be able to match their skills with that are required by the employers. And our IHL colleagues probably will be what I call perhaps the first line of defense, or where they could take that proactive steps to engage with the employers to ensure that the programs that they devise and push out to the students would enable them to build relevant skills that subsequently would help them to find gainful employment with our employers. Now, I think after this webinar, if any of you have any pressing questions or needs to raise, do contact us at SSG through our email, ssgwebinar@gmail.com. And also, if you wish to connect further with Mark and Callam, drop us an email and we will help you to do that. I think Mark and Callam would be ready and pleased to address any other questions that you may want to pose to them directly. Now, today's webinar will be hosting on YouTube, along with the slides courtesy of Indeed that we'll be making available via email and platforms such as My SkillsFuture. We will email to all of you, our audience, to inform and share in the next few days. Once we disconnect from this webinar, I would appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes of your time to complete a short survey. Your feedback is confidential and it will help us to improve our future webinars to serve you better. Now, before I end off, just want to thank Mark and Callam from Indeed again, and I'm Yen Sun, moderator for this second SSG Jobs and Skills Insights webinar. On behalf of SSG and Indeed, thank you everyone for supporting this webinar with your time, and I hope to see you soon at the next webinar that we have scheduled on 22nd of October. Do look out for our EDM as we blast it out in the early part of next month. Thank you very much.